so much history has been buried, and therefore we don't have a strong comparative analysis to be able to look back in time at certain events to see that these are questions that actually have been answered before
Hmm.
in multiple different contexts. And my journey was really about learning this intelligence and being able to bring it forward. And so part of peace intelligence is built upon this ancient and ancestral knowledge of how to build peace, even in the face of oppression or even in the face of major cataclysmic events or things that are happening. Peace is a reality, and it's a reality that we can create and a reality that we can call into our experience. But first, we need to really truly understand what it is because oftentimes we are so focused on what other people are doing to us.
Right.
Yet my work has showed me that even in environments where people want to bring peace, even in environments such as working in organizations that are for ecological change, they're for, climate change. However, if you talk to the different groups within that organization, there are huge, major conflicts between the people that want to save the whales, the people that want to save indigenous cultures, and the people who don't believe we should be saving anyone at all. We have to help people to help themselves.
Mhm.
Major divisions and conflicts are preventing any movement forward or any true impact from that organization to communities. So is it that the issue when it comes to the big questions of who's doing this to us, is the answer anyone else but ourselves?
Mm.
When we can begin to accept personal responsibility, then we can begin to move from a place of empowerment because we know that the power is with us to make the change.
That's June Benjamin, attorney, peace innovator and founder, and chief visionary officer of Peace IQ. I am Hema Lomax, and welcome to Unless the podcast. June Benjamin is a peace founder, peace warrior, and attorney working at the forefront of AI governance, human rights, and peace intelligence. June's life journey as a refugee from the Liberian Civil War and a Baha'i refugee from Iran has fueled her passion for fostering sustainable peace through innovative solutions. Her visionary company, IQ, is a peace technology company dedicated to helping leaders develop a positive and invested relationship with peace to improve the social performance and sustainability of their communities. As the founder of Peace IQ, June coined the term peace intelligence, a multifaceted approach that integrates AI, wisdom from ancient traditions, and peace data to train AI in providing insights and resolving conflicts. June holds a Master of Arts in International Peace and Conflict Resolution from American University, where her law clinic, policy, and human rights work was recognized with the Dean's Award for Professional Responsibility. June, welcome to Unless the Podcast. I am so happy to have you join me here today.
Thanks, Emma.
Now, I'm so excited to talk to you about all the things peace intelligence, peace innovation, peace technology, and being a peace warrior. But I should start by inviting you to tell our listeners who you are and what is your day job.
I am a peace warrior, and my day starts every morning fighting for peace with my kids. No, I look at peace from an everyday lens. Something as simple as moms at home teaching their children how to resolve conflicts with other kids, like how to incorporate different spiritual practices that we teach our children, such as kindness, love, and unity. These are all important functions of my everyday job. Um, and I carry on that work not just as a mom, but also as a human rights attorney and activist. I also, in true millennial fashion, have been able to leverage the intelligence that I've learned in one job in other contexts as well. So while as a human rights attorney, I am fighting for the relief of people who have been persecuted, oftentimes by their government or other organizations within their home countries, we are also using this information to sensitize AI governance and tech corporations on how they are developing their policies to ensure that AI is governed for the betterment of humanity and not for its destruction.
So important. And jokes aside, you're right. Being a peace warrior starts at home with the little ones. But how do you define peace when you apply it in all of these different areas? What does peace mean in terms of your vision and your purpose?
I think peace is defined by everyone in many different ways, right? And part of my job is sensitizing people not to impose a definition of peace on others, but to collect that data and develop a collective social fabric of what does it mean to, at its basic core, have a positive social life.
No.
That's what we came here to do as human beings. We didn't come here to be miserable and oppressed and fighting. We came here to build and to grow and to develop things beyond our wildest imaginations. And I have just uncovered that in order to do that, we have to have a foundation of peace. It is my mission, I believe, to raise the peace intelligence of this planet. And I define peace intelligence as the ability and the capacity to understand, to interpret, and to act upon complex dynamics of conflict, cooperation, and reconciliation across many different contexts. That could happen in a personal context, an organizational context, a societal context, any way that human beings organize ourselves. And peace intelligence is formed from leveraging a combination of historical knowledge, contemporary analysis, and forward-thinking solutions. I have developed a company called Peace IQ, which plays on this term peace intelligence, that is at the forefront of teaching this methodology to individuals, organizations, and cities.
Well, gosh, I'm already just so inspired by this, and there are so many applications. June, how did you come to want to work in the area of peace intelligence?
As a refugee, I am someone who never really had a choice but to work on peace. When you're living in an environment where your everyday experience is one of oppression, you have to look inwards into your community to find ways to develop a social fabric to improve your personal experience and the experience of your culture and your society, your community, to have a more peaceful coexistence. And I think that when we look at communities that have successfully been able to do this, not just pockets of communities, but even societies throughout history, we can see that they've developed a science to how they engage with one another. And this is the science that I have been, I would say, trained in ever since as a child. I come from two different, I would say, like family lineages that took this mission of peace very seriously. From my mother's side, as a Baha'i refugee coming from Iran, there was a way of life recognized that in a diverse society, that we don't just have a diversity of races, but a diversity of different spiritual traditions. And from that faith, I've learned that there's a strength in being able to be in a context with you, with other people that have different beliefs. And there's so many things to learn from people that have different beliefs. And we share such strong commonalities that should inform our worldview. And this is nothing new. When we look in history at different movements such as womanism that drew upon African cosmology and indigenous cosmology, we can look back to a time in ancient civilizations where it was a positive thing to have that spiritual diversity
Mhm.
and to be influenced by that spiritual diversity. There's almost a recognition that the spiritual realm, like if we even look at some Chinese traditions, that the spiritual realm is full and it's also diverse and it's constantly communicating with us. And so, I grew up as the child of martyrs who had been not just tortured, but killed for wanting to advance these concepts. And oftentimes when something is oppressed, as we see in so many different religions, that is actually what gives strength to it becoming very sacred within that community and
Mhm.
then passed down and preserved within that community. And so a lot of this intelligence was passed down to me through my spiritual tradition, through my cultural background, also being the daughter of an architect who was also the descendant of African chiefs. And it was their responsibility to keep the social fabric united. And so I also always had this very strong vision of peace that was embedded in not just social practice, but in an architectural and data-driven perspective. And so these are kind of like the driving conversations that were occurring in my home. And yet at the same time, the refugee experience is an interesting one because you grow up with such beautiful understanding of your homeland and the traditions and the culture, but oftentimes it is a very traumatic experience. And when trauma is left unresolved, oftentimes the victim can eventually become a perpetrator
Mhm.
of the same trauma and violence that they experienced. And we see this even on a global scale. And instead of focusing on that, I think I've chosen to focus on the fact that there's something wrong in the healing process. And I believe that a peaceful society is a society that operates where its governance, its healthcare, all of its social infrastructure should be designed to be anti-inflammatory,
Mm,
not inflammatory.
I love that.
Because oftentimes we think that the opposite of peace is conflict. We think the opposite of peace is violence. But in my experiences, working in communities hand in hand with people, the experience and the information that I've come to observe is that the opposite of peace is pain.
Mm,
And it is because we have so many people with so much unresolved pain who really, truly in their heart may have within their own communities grew up with their own spiritual visions of what the world should be and how it should operate. They are also wanting peace.
yes.
They are also wanting to achieve peace, but it's just a peace that has not yet been integrated. Our vision of peace needs to be integrated with one another in order to achieve it.
June, that's so powerful. And there's so much that you said that I want to unpack. Integrated peace, a vision of integrated peace is certainly a huge aspiration here. And we need to think about how we can achieve that. I know you've thought about that a lot, but before we get to the ways in which you thought about how to achieve that, I want to just go back to your stories. As you describe it, I feel like you don't need to have experienced actual violence to understand and empathize with what you've just explained. That idea of the opposite of peace is pain. I think we can all understand exactly viscerally what you mean there. But in fact, in your case, you were born in the middle of a civil war, a very violent civil war. Is that right, in Liberia?
Yes. I
And
was born in the Civil War in Liberia, and eventually we began a path to migrate to Sierra Leone, where the war actually expanded there as well.
so you've seen and your family's seen firsthand the ravages of violence, the ravages of war. And you've told me you've managed to apply in your life the stories that have been told. You've got a thread in your ancestry of how to handle those situations. But I'm going to assume that it wasn't something that you learned overnight. It was something you had to come to, a realization you had to come to. Can you tell us the story of how you coped with those early days and what brought you to this realization?
Right. So in those early days, obviously I was born in the conflict in Liberia, but I was a baby when we came to the United States, about 1 or 2 years old. And even in that experience, right, I grew up in communities that were impacted by, I would say, instruments to engineer violence within those communities.
Hmm.
Um, and there was a lot of violence. Not only was there violence in those communities, but my family and myself also participated in that violence. And I think that's why today I can be sympathetic to people who are afraid to kind of go there, like a lot of peace advocates, they're scared to talk about when they get upset or when they get mad or when they just snap. But for me, growing up in those communities, it really showed me that all of us are actually living in incredible resilience to so much oppression imposed upon us that it's really a miracle. Even when we see ourselves enacting and replicating this violence, it is still truly a miracle to be a human being
Mhm.
and to want peace. And some of my earliest experiences in those neighborhoods um, involved taking a different direction than some of the other people in my family who had began to adapt to this environment.
Mhm.
So I think it's more so a question of, even if you're currently in an environment that does not look peaceful, how can you go about creating a peace reality? And for me, as a child, that started first by being what I call a peace warrior. Because there was so much violence and trauma within my own home, I found myself having to first stand up for people who were younger than me in that system,
Mhm.
and being the one to say, no, I'm not going to partake in this and you're not going to partake in this. I love you. However, I love myself. And it really took a journey of going through an experience of coming to deep personal peace
Mhm.
and prioritizing that personal peace above all things before I could get to a place where I can now say that this, while like all of us, we want to focus on global issues and global peace and politics, we cannot get there unless we do this inner work,
Mhm.
to understand the parts that we play in violence within our homes, within our communities, within our work environments. And I think that is so powerful and so important because when I look back at the work of major peace activists like Martin Luther King Jr., or Nelson Mandela, or even the manifestations such as Christ, Moses, Muhammad. These are all people who were facing incredibly oppressive environments, and they didn't even have half of the tools that
Mhm.
we have today to address even more oppressive environments. And yet their work was focused on this everyday peace. So I feel that there's something in that. There's something in this transformation, this internal transformation, and the transformation at the community and local level that is the answer. And I think this is why most of my work is so focused on helping not just the community, but people who I see as leaders of those communities are entrepreneurs often. And we're moving into a context where people are not just becoming entrepreneurs for the sake of making money, but for the sake of truly understanding and tapping into the fact that we are part of a local leadership. We are
Mhm.
part of helping to ensure that our community obtain resources that can help then innovate and build things for the community that can also be monetized and increase profit for that community. And I think getting back to this peace leadership, this peace entrepreneurship is so incredibly important. Even if we look at the founding of major civilizations today, like America, they were founded from on the drive of entrepreneurs.
Right.
And I think that we need to call back this power and call back this power to the community. And this is the time. And even the UN, right, Hema, you could speak to this, recognizes the importance of peace done at the business level and at the
Mhm.
community level.
Mhm.
Um, these are major, not just tools that like I'm saying or talking about, but scientific tools that have been highlighted by international institutions as highly effective because when businesses are strong, even in the midst of a escalated conflict, when businesses are advancing peace, we see that they are often a major tool of resilience in the face of social conflict. And so this is part of my vision, not just teaching peace intelligence, but giving businesses tools to upscale peace and to approach peace within their organizations, as well as understanding that peace is a power that is going to unlock unimaginable profit and opportunity for you and your business and your community. And this is something that we need to get behind and we need to advocate for and we need to
And wow, you've done that in such measure. Gina, I'm so moved by your story. And again, you're ready to take on those issues, those wicked problems, and bring together the business communities, bring together the United Nations, bring together these entities that have the positional power and the resources to make a difference. So again, we're going to talk about what you've done there with Peace IQ. But I want to go back a little bit more because you've talked about your pain and how you've managed to turn that and convert it into entrepreneurship. And you've mentioned in such a moving way your personal journey, the way that you were able to find peace within first. What tips or advice have you got for somebody that might find themselves in a similar situation in a place that's supposed to be a refuge but wasn't, as you described, you're a refugee that came to the US, but you didn't find yourself in a peaceful environment, but you somehow managed to find peace yourself first. What advice would you give to someone that's in that situation?
So I'll share a little bit more about my story as well. So I did, as I mentioned, participate in violence at some point because sometimes that may be all you have,
Mhm.
right? Like if you are in a situation, I can think back of like being in as young as like middle school and being being by the lockers, and next thing I know, feel a fist like whizzing past my head,
Right.
boom, hit the locker right behind my head. And in those situations, right, I'm not saying that you'll never be in a situation where you will need not to defend yourself. And I'm not saying that we'll ever be in a situation where the community doesn't need to defend itself.
Mhm.
However, as I grew up, I actually began to participate in more nonviolent solutions to
Mhm.
achieving my own peace. I actually moved to the Washington, D.C. area in high school, and that's where I started to participate in developing nonviolent solutions to these kind of like wicked problems. And actually participated in one of the first major youth-led movements, which was the Save Darfur movement. So from a very early age, I mean, I was already on the doorsteps of the White House, like marching and demanding, trying to fight some of these wicked problems, head on, but from a very different lens, because I began to see, right, like the issue wasn't just us, it wasn't just people, but there
Mm.
was actually a systemic issue to
Right.
this. And I'm just like, I have this mindset of, well, okay, let's just go change the system.
There we go.
um as many youth do. And I think many youth right now are frustrated because it's almost like we keep trying to push them to solve the next generation's issue without really giving them access or opportunity to change the instruments and
Mhm.
change the institutions or change the approaches that actually are progenitively creating these issues.
June, you said you moved to DC and were able to participate in more non-violent forms of peace building, peacemaking. What were you able to do in DC that moved you to want to make a difference?
So in DC, I actually attended American University where I actually obtained a master's in peace and conflict resolution. And during that time, from then until now, I've been continuously developing different social organizations and social movements in order to advance peace. That included the Save Darfur campaign. As a youth, I was part of one of the biggest youth-led movements to be able, and this was really a movement that called together the power of youth to participate in actually what I later learned by studying peace and conflict resolution was an instrument of peace called
Mhm.
collective security. And collective security is actually the founding principle behind our international peace system at the UN level. And collective security is actually just the notion that we're not going to just let one of us get jumped. We're all going to come up and show up, right?
Love that. Yeah.
And stand and stand up. Now, of course, at an international and at a governance level, this has been co-opted in many ways, right? But at the community level, we can still use this as a tool to prevent violence from being enacted on one person.
Hmm.
I kind of think that we've touched on it a little bit through cancel culture. Maybe we've overused it,
Maybe.
but sometimes like, a lot of these things do feel like red hot issues, so I get it. But it's just simply the notion that you could be someone at a Walmart, be a Walmart shopper and get hurt there, and now you can go on social media and you can have the whole world show up to protect you, you know what I'm saying, to
Hmm.
have your back in that situation. And so that's just like one instrument, right? And there's so many other tools and techniques that I've utilized um, in different contexts. For example, we don't just teach conflict resolution, we also teach the art of peace building.
Hmm.
So we have built and developed several peace clubs across Maryland and DC and Virginia and within different high schools. And these high school students were actually learning the science and the art of peace. So therefore, we were developing a culture of peace within those contexts that then later on, when there were conflicts, little fires that started, there was already a social fabric. There was already an art. These children were already of an understanding of how to respond to conflict, how to inspire cooperation and move to reconciliation. And therefore, they're learning concepts of not just one type of justice, not just how do we correct people's actions, but also how do we restore? What does restorative justice look like
Hmm.
in this situation? So these are different tools and methodologies that I have also learned in studying peace and conflict resolution and obtaining my master's in peace and conflict resolution, um, that I believe should be taught at every level. I mean, if you think about it, I don't know about you, but like for me growing up, I don't remember receiving a peace education anywhere. Like,
No,
you
not at
know,
all.
like the most that we're taught is like walk away, don't hit. Um,
I mean, as a parent, there's always been two camps, right? It's like hit back or walk away, but neither of them seem right. Neither of them seem satisfactory. And I'm so excited to hear that at least in the DMV, we've got some thought about putting that into the fabric of our youth, so that they have the skills ready in their conscious when they need them. You've talked about collective security, but now I'm hearing collective innovation there, collective peace building, where we teach the
yeah,
skills of conflict resolution. And again, these are not just needed at wartime. These are not just needed in terms of bullying. These are needed in the workplace. These are needed in the home. As you said at the top, these are needed with our children. We need to figure out how we can resolve conflict peacefully and, to your point, restoratively, because the relationship must continue after a conflict. I think that's
right.
really powerful. You've talked a little bit about what you did in DC. What made you realize that this was something you needed to spend your time doing as a career and focus on when it comes to peace innovation and peace entrepreneurship? Was there a pivotal moment for you where you realized you had something to offer in this space?
That's a really good question. I think that it's something that I always knew.
Mm.
I think it's something that I always knew that I would be doing, and it's something that I often resisted. And I've tried to be everything else but this.
Ah, interesting.
Um, but I have met really amazing mentors along the way that really helped me to believe further, not just in my mission, but the viability of it. And some of those mentors included interning for Tiandra Miller, who is the project director at North Carolina Legal Aid, and being exposed and in a high school environment, high school age, to a legal environment where the main focus was in providing relief to immigrants and refugees and women who had experienced domestic violence, it actually gave me a true solace because it helped me to begin to understand and contextualize the level of violence that I had experienced.
Hmm.
And so, mm, while yes, it was always my role to help these people, at the end of the day, they were the ones who were teaching and helping me. And it was just incredible to witness their strength because oftentimes we think of people who are refugees as people who are completely disempowered, when in reality, many of those people are the people who were fighting for peace in their countries and communities. And so I felt that it was my role in a way to fight for the fighters. And that's why to this day, I still, I'm not so much of a pacifist in that way. So I still have this warrior kind of element to my spirit. It's just a matter of like how are you channeling that and what are you using that for? And there are many people that maybe would say, "Oh, you can't fight for peace." Um, and I would just challenge them back and say, "Well, I do it every day."
Yes.
I don't know what then what am I doing? But I that's what I do every day, And I think it's my ability to be authentic about this and to be real and be in the fight with them that actually helps people to open up their heart and their mind to the possibility of transforming their personal life and perhaps one day the possibility of transforming their families and their communities and their countries.
June, we've just had a general election in the US, and really polarization is on the minds of many and how we can heal and unite across party political lines and divisions. How do you think your vision for peace building can help us in this moment?
I think my vision for peace building will help us in the moment because it's a skill that we need in order to be prepared. It's kind of like, when you look at other countries who were impacted by COVID, they got hit, but they kept on ticking because they were prepared. They had previous experiences with those kinds of diseases, and therefore they already knew, and we're not just new, but we're in a system of practice to do those things in order to prevent it from becoming worse. But then more the global northern countries, we didn't. And therefore we weren't as prepared when something challenged our need to be resilient. And I think that this is the same when it comes to peace skills and abilities. When you look at other countries that have been impacted by war and conflict at that scale, they have been upskilled through peace organizations of how to respond to violence, right? I don't understand yet why we don't believe the same thing needs to be applied to us, but I believe that we are moving into that realization that this is a resilience that we need to build at the individual, community, and business level and into the governance level. We cannot just rely on people like myself. I'm tired. Okay. Y'all can't keep relying on me to solve everything. But and that is a trend where there's peacemakers and peace builders, and we tend to rely on them, but then we don't build this resilience. And then when they go down or they're tired, then what,
Mhm.
So, an example of that would be actually on the night of the election, there was like this palatable built up of emotion, like that you could just feel and see, and you felt everyone like tiptoeing around each other in a weird way. And unfortunately, I saw that happen with the kids in schools, and including my own children were wrapped up in a conflict that was occurring in our community between the children of families who were like pro gun, pro-Trump, and also from a family who is pro-Black and from Oakland. So their kids didn't just have a conflict. What happened is the children also understand how to pull different levels of additional violence. Like I know who to tell in order to pump up this conflict into like a wider spread issue. And they're looking and seeking for more protection, right? Or to support them in their side of the battle. But what that translated to was parents getting involved physically, neighborhoods getting involved, families getting involved from both sides. This really had the potential of becoming a very explosive situation that I don't even want to think of, like how bad it could have
Mhm.
gotten. But the way that I approached this conflict was from a place of non-reactivity. And I think that in this environment right now where everything is so reactive, we have to learn not to conduct that, not to be conductive to that, right? And also putting myself in the shoes of each person, the mom that got all involved and was yelling and screaming at the bus stop, all these obscenities. It's very easy, especially if you're someone who's advancing peace, to be very judgmental of that and to become very defensive. But I've been that mom. Maybe not that mom. I never screamed at no kids, but I've been, triggered where I felt like my child's personal safety was at risk in a conflict or a fight, or, from a teacher who maybe was picking on my child in some kind of way. And I've been that mama. And it's about understanding that this person may be in pain, this person's sense of safety may be feeling spiked in some kind of way. And your ability to hold space in that situation could be the difference in moving towards a resolution or not. And my ability to do that for both of those families offered them a way to express and release their anger without needing to taking it out on each other.
Mhm.
And another successful tool that we used was we came up with a collective term, and our collective term was squashed. And so I was just using this word as much as I could, but it's something that just became one of our uniting things. Okay, maybe we don't like each other right now, but can we squash it? Yeah, we can
Nice.
squash it, squashed.
Yes.
And we kept repeating this word, and the use of language is also really important in these contexts. And it was us creating a shared language in that moment. And then from there, we went from a shared language to a shared identity. Instead of being different moms protecting each of our kids, we became the moms that were trying to squash it, and we were the moms who were trying to bring peace and end it. And that is the way that anytime I would speak to someone else, including the school, I would talk about each player as if we were all united. And then eventually everybody just chose to adopt this identity. I don't know. It's like I said it enough times, and then they were like, yeah, you know what? And then they were like about to get in trouble for some of their behaviors. And then they came on my side and they were like, yes, now we're the moms for peace. And I'm like, you would, but but it's okay. You can come over here now, So
Yes, you did
you
that.
know, yeah, and in that way, we were able to provide enough of an intervention and enough of an example to our children and to the school. And then the school was also able to do their part in being that institutional piece to prevent the little fires from starting for other kids from stoking it in the future. And
Mhm.
so really it was working together as all parts of a whole. And this really is what intelligence is about, that we are all pieces and we all hold a part, and the ability to respond to conflict and inspire cooperation and move towards reconciliation. And that is an intelligence that I think that each and every one of us should have, and what we are solving for at Peace IQ.
Oh, June, thank you for sharing that example of peace intelligence in action. It's so inspiring to hear you explain something that happened just last week involving your own children and your own community. But what I take away from that is it's the art and science of peace intelligence and peace building is within reach. Not only is it needed every day, but it's also within reach. I mean, you've talked about holding space, empathy, being non-reactive. These are things that are within reach. They're simple things that we should all be able to practice. I'm so grateful to you for sharing that really powerful example. It seems to me that you've been asking yourself some big questions all your life. The why questions, like why is this happening? How could this be allowed? Who's responsible? And I wonder, did you ever get answers to those questions, or did you feel you had to be a fighter and find them yourself? What happened with those questions, and where do those questions lead you?
I think that those questions are often answered through history. I think that so much history has been buried, and therefore we don't have a strong comparative analysis to be able to look back in time at certain events to see that these are questions that actually have been answered before
Mm,
in multiple different contexts. And my journey was really about learning this intelligence and being able to bring it forward. And so part of peace intelligence is built upon this ancient and ancestral knowledge of how to build peace, even in the face of oppression or even in the face of major cataclysmic events or things that are happening. Peace is a reality, and it's a reality that we can create and a reality that we can call into our experience. But first, we need to really truly understand what it is because oftentimes we are so focused on what other people are doing to us.
right.
Yet my work has showed me that even in environments where people want to bring peace, even in environments such as working in organizations that are for ecological change, they're for, climate change. However, if you talk to the different groups within that organization, there are huge, major conflicts between the people that want to save the whales, the people that want to save indigenous cultures, and the people who don't believe we should be saving anyone at all. We have to help people to help themselves.
Mhm.
And these major divisions and conflicts are preventing any movement forward or any true impact from that organization to communities. So is it that the issue when it comes to the big questions of who's doing this to us, is the answer anyone else but ourselves?
Mm.
So when we can begin to accept personal responsibility, then we can begin to move from a place of empowerment because we know that the power is with us to make the change.
Such powerful words, June, and I can't agree more with your sentiment that we can look internally first to see what we can do. And certainly you looked internally. You didn't just look internally, you looked to the stories that were told to you by your father, by your family, and I'm assuming the stories that were told to him. What was the role of these spiritual stories, knowledge, and traditions in your realization of peace intelligence?
The role of those stories, really, most stories have this hero journey and this
Mhm.
villain journey. And I do find more indigenous stories to be much more complex with those storylines. And it really is all pointing to this internal wholeness that we must all achieve and that we've all come here to achieve. But also, I think that these stories were pointing me to be able to achieve that wholeness within myself because I spent so many years, I would say, on the battlefield. And I
Mhm.
know a lot of people can relate to this because we want to achieve a social mission. And so we're out there to change everyone else. But being an attorney, working with people who have very traumatic and devastating experiences, and they're consistently sharing this with you. As much as you want to help them, what I've realized is that ultimately, if you're not at peace with yourself, you really cannot be the best advocate for them.
Mhm.
And I've seen, not only have I done this myself, but I've seen other attorneys in that space not think through what the other person might need in order to be at peace, to tell you their story, because that person hasn't even thought about their own needs or their own safety. So,
Hmm.
for example, something as simple as closing the door before asking a refugee about their experience and creating that environment of safety, which is a
Hmm.
part of peace, to be able for them to tell you not just the story that they have practiced in front of other authority figures that did not have their best interest at heart. They're not going to be able to tell you what really happened, if we don't create that personal safety for them. And I think that for me, it was my story had to basically I had to come to this understanding that I had to come to this place of such um I had to come to a place where I just let everything fall apart in my life, because anyone who's done any level of community work, you've not just experienced the joys of that work, but you've experienced the pain of that work. So many of the people that we are fighting for can oftentimes work to undermine the vision that you have for peace, or even peace for themselves or for their communities. And when you are this person that is trying to be that medium, you can be attacked,
Hmm.
you can be hurt, and those things can be projected on you. And therefore, you need to have a very strong sense of internal peace before doing this kind of work. Whether you're doing it from a scientific lens, an advocacy lens, or from a building lens, you do need to have this framework that peace starts with me and it starts from within myself.
Such good advice for anyone trying to help in this space. June, how have you been able to leverage the wisdom of these stories in Peace IQ, the technology company you've built?
At the heart of Peace IQ is a project which we are developing called Tula. Tula is an innovative game where players travel back in time to learn these ancient stories, this ancient wisdom, these technologies, and these peace practices. And then they return to the present time to build a peace intelligent city.
Wow.
So in this game, they take on the role of a peace builder, and that peace builder goes on these team challenges as a collective, almost like superhero, peace building team, to journey back in time, solve different challenges in order to retrieve the peace intel or the peace intelligence. So peace
Hmm.
intelligence in the game is not just teaching you about the stories, but teaching you how to derive data and information from these stories, and not just how to collect this piece data and intel, but how to use it and adapt it to other industries, um, to develop and build the social fabric of your sim-like futuristic peace intelligence city, but also how to incorporate in different industries within the city.
That's so clever and so innovative. I mean, just this idea that you can go and find the lessons yourselves and then bring them back in the game to apply them in a different industry is mind-blowing. Now, this game, how did you come up with the idea of doing this in a game? This is amazing.
Well, I also have mentors such as Lual Mayan, who has successfully designed a peace game. He's won awards for his peace game. And Lual, like me, is also a refugee. And his game is more so taking you through the refugee experience and sensitizing players to have empathy and an understanding of what that experience is. And what I learned from Lual really was just that we can fight for peace, right? Because he's taking you on a journey where someone is fighting for their peace.
Hmm.
And just sensitizing people to what that experience is like and why we should help them. I think Peace IQ, we want to also take it into the step of not just being sensitized to this person, but also how to support this person and how to build the infrastructure in which we have an appropriate response to that kind of issue in humanity, and also a response that will give way to building solutions in which something like that doesn't happen. And so with Peace IQ, we're moving into an experience where we are actually simulating conflicts based on the player's ability in the game. So Peace IQ is actually built upon an AI system in which we are learning piece information and data from the users as they are interacting with the game that then provides the user as well as organizations insights, actionable insights that can then be applied in the everyday experience.
That's magical. So you're able to leverage this game, not just for schools and for children, but this is something that a corporation can use as a tool for its employees. Is that correct?
Exactly, in the onboarding experience. And this will be something that I believe will be truly innovative, not just for the peace world, but also in the realm of learning and innovation and the way that we understand intelligence.
Mm.
Because right now, I think the way that we look at intelligence is like, how hard can you train for something? How much do you know in one, sector? And like the kids, they hate this stuff now, It's like, and I think everything is pointing to the fact that we learn through immersion, and that intelligence is not just something that is built in one subject, but true intelligence is something that operates across systems and ecosystems and whole systems. Even when we look at nature, I've been really getting into like nature walks lately, which is like another element of my peace building. Like, wow, like nature is a very free tool for all of us that,
Right.
for peace. And just watching the way that like that ecosystem operates is so fascinating. It's like everything just knows where everything goes and where everything needs. And I
Mm.
think that this is a sign of what true intelligence is. And so for Peace IQ, we are both teaching peace and we are teaching intelligence.
June, as you know, I work in the corporate compliance space, and we're guilty of what you said. We knowledge, no, throwing knowledge at people, throwing tests at people, and people hate it. It's true, right? Nobody wants the compliance training each year. We're well attuned to the idea of gaming in learning and engagement, but this idea of intelligence, I talk a lot about crowdsourcing risk intelligence and trying to make sure that we equip and empower our employees to spot the risks themselves and figure out how to deal with them and then share that information. It sounds very similar to what you've been able to do in the game. I think it's really clever to, whether it's nature or the game or risk management, to find ways to simulate the problems that we may encounter and then really practice the skill of working together to solve them. So I'm really excited to hear that you've taken your entrepreneurial journey into the corporate space and really finding ways to bring peace into that environment. We know that there's a lot of trauma at work, hopefully not too much violence, but we do hear about harassment at work, violence at work, active shooting. All of these things are real problems that we hear about in this day and age. And certainly we want to look for ways to bring the peace intelligence, or as you call it, the science of peace into the corporation. So what would you recommend that we do when it comes to leveraging this peace intelligence at work? How can we do that better?
So I think that in order to leverage peace intelligence at work, first we need to recognize that our work environments are not separated from our communities.
Mhm.
They sit and are situated within our communities. And therefore, when we think about work conflicts, we need to think about them from a much more complex way. As you know, like anyone in their work environment right now can understand it's palatable, or you have experienced a complex conflict that does not just have to do with, you know, Billy wants to lead and somebody else is stepping on his toes. Like it's much more dynamic than that right now. We are actually dealing with major social wicked challenges in the work environment. And to my point from earlier, like this is why companies do need to begin to approach this from an empowered lens, to see yourself as the leader, as the peace entrepreneur, because each and every one of us are either advancing conflict or peace.
Right.
So Some of the ways that we can begin to apply this at work is doing things like a conflict analysis. When there is a conflict at work, stepping back and understanding that this is not a conflict between two people. The two people are just like usually the iceberg, right? But ultimately, you've got many players hiding in the wings on both sides, and oftentimes even bigger social challenges and communities behind that. So when we begin to analyze and apply a contemporary data lens, and this is why through Peace IQ, it is based upon ancient wisdom, but we do want to root and bring it back into a contemporary analysis and framework, because also that is an important source of knowledge and intelligence. So again, this is why we take an integrated approach. And there are data points that we can look at to be able to make better decisions. I remember seeing a major conflict that occurred at Google where one employee had brought up the fact that they felt that the caste system had impacted them at work and their employment opportunities. And as a form of, I guess, restorative justice, they wanted to be able to raise awareness about this issue within the workplace. And at that time, it felt very, still kind of like foreign, whether we do that or we don't do that. And a lot of businesses right now are grappling with that question and have different responses and reactions to these social issues and challenges that are coming into the workplace. To many business managers, this can feel messy. Why would I be dealing with this in my corporate environment? But what I would like to illustrate to them is that you're already dealing with it in your corporate environment. It's just that we're not dealing with it very well. Right now, conflict costs US companies, just in the US alone, $360 billion every single year. And that is in employee litigation, that is in turnover, but the biggest chunk of that is actually in the loss of productivity.
Right.
Because if your workforce does not feel safe or psychologically safe to be themselves, their authentic self at work, what they do is they begin to protect their own peace by disengaging meaningfully with that corporation. And therefore, what that is saying is that we already have conflict resolution methodologies at work. They just don't work well.
Right.
And the diversity of incoming employees or the newfound authenticity from employees now, because there has been, a social evolution, that these conflict resolution methodologies and infrastructure are making it seem as if being diverse is the problem, when in reality, having these broken methodologies is the problem. And there is a way forward that is meaningful and that will actually result in a more united social community. And on that note, I also want to say that while there is a lot of backlash right now around DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion is actually a major and pretty basic peace building technique. And I think that a lot of people forget that.
Mm.
A lot of people see DEI in a weird way as some sort of pick me kind of salute, like this is what we're begging or asking to be integrated into that community. And they really forget how diversity, equity, inclusion actually came into the workforce was in the wake of massive civil protests and unrest, and quite frankly, people being done with businesses sitting on the sidelines and not being involved in forwarding peace for their communities, but also benefiting from talent and benefiting from the work of people that exist within communities that are impacted by both this business, either those businesses' decisions and participation in conflict, or its silence. And that is how we got to diversity and equity and inclusion as a peace offering between society and companies. And we forget that we just so quickly we have forgotten that.
June, I think part of the reason that we forget that is because there's increased polarization because we're not dealing with the conflict. We go into our corners and then those kind of ideas come up, the backlash comes up. And I love that you're brave and audacious enough to say, let's stop doing the things the way we've already always been doing them and to start thinking about how to do it in a different way. Um, it's difficult. But as you I said, I'd like to read a quote from something you've written. We're all facing conflict, you said. It's endemic to almost every aspect of our lives. And with the constant exposure to how bad things are, also comes the push to do something about it. From equity in the workspace to the push for corporate social justice, we are moving towards a collective truth. Peace is now everyone's job. You wrote that. What were you thinking when you wrote that?
I was thinking that not just that peace is everyone's job, but I was starting to feel that everybody wants peace to be their job. Deep down inside, we want to work on this. Like we don't want to just go to work and push numbers all day. Like when I think that people are coming to this realization that we are here to work on this. And it's the most fulfilling thing that you can do in life. And not only is it the most fulfilling thing you can do in life, but it will unlock a level of human innovation and potential that we've never seen before. And there's something within us that knows that and is driving towards that. And I truly believe and have full faith that humanity will achieve that.
I couldn't think of a better way to end this podcast. What wonderful, inspiring words, June. Thank you for sharing that with us. And this podcast is called Unless, based on the book by Dr. Seuss, The Lorax. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. So I'm so grateful to you for joining me today, for sharing your stories and sharing your inspiring, audacious efforts to make sure that everybody knows peace is their job. So thank you, June. Really, real pleasure having you here today.
Thank you, Hema. Thank you for having me.